Running a business is a tough proposition. There are costs to be minimized at every turn. And at some point, the corporation says, let somebody else deal with that. Let's let somebody else supply the military power to the Middle East to protect the oil at its source. Let's let somebody else build the roads that we can drive these automobiles on. Let's let somebody else have those problems. And that is where externalities come from, that notion of let somebody else deal with that. I got all I can handle myself.
A corporation is an externalizing machine in the same way that a shark is a killing machine. Each one is designed in a very efficient way to accomplish particular objectives. In the achievement of those objectives, there isn't any question of malevolence or of will. The enterprise has within it, and the shark has within it, those characteristics that enable it to do that for which it was designed.
Thanks to the worst president in U.S. history, we're now saddled with one of the worst Supreme Courts in U.S. history, which recently passed down one of the worst rulings in U.S. history, in the case of Citizens United versus the FEC. In a stunning example of the kind of judicial activism and legislating from the bench that Republicans constantly whine about, the Roberts Court overturned multiple precedents to declare that corporations, domestic and apparently foreign, have an unlimited right to free speech when it comes to our elections, with free speech meaning the money they can spend on political advertising and advocacy. Now you might be asking, why do corporations have the right to free speech? They aren't people. And you'd be right, because they certainly aren't. But thanks to a questionable interpretation of a case in 1886, corporations are legally considered people, which begs the question, if corporations are people, what kind of people are they? That's a question we all need to be asking ourselves in this scary new country the Roberts Court has created. In the 2003 documentary, The Corporation, will give you an answer you'll never forget. The film starts with a history of the corporation, which was originally designed as a legal construct where a group of people was issued a charter by the government to provide some service to the community. The corporation could sign contracts, sue, and buy property just like a person. But when the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 to give former slaves constitutional rights, corporations were able to sneak themselves in and demand that they too deserve the same rights as people. Despite the friendly personas corporations create for themselves, they're clearly not like you or I. The film makes the very persuasive argument that if a corporation were a person, it would most closely resemble a psychopath, someone with no morals or conscience and a complete inability to feel empathy. The film then goes through a personality diagnostic checklist, finding that corporations possess such psychopathic traits as a reckless disregard for the safety of others, repeated lying and manipulation, and an incapacity to feel guilt. To back up this explosive claim, the film examines dozens of cases where corporations display these psychopathic traits through cruelty to workers and animals, willingness to collude with fascistic regimes like the Nazis and dictatorships, and destruction of the environment through pollution and the plundering of natural resources. That's because no matter what anyone tells you, a corporation has only one objective: maximizing profits for shareholders. Any factors that might reduce profits are externalized, a clinical-sounding word that just means letting someone else deal with the mess you created, like dumping toxic waste into rivers regardless of who it hurts downstream because it would cost you money to deal with it responsibly. The film goes on to look at examples of how corporations are increasingly attempting to privatize and control our lives, from patenting forms of life, making it illegal to gather rainwater or save crop seeds, to censoring criticism of corporations in the corporate-owned media. The corporation enlists an impressive array of experts, including activists and critics of corporations like Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, Michael Moore, and Naomi Klein, as well as their defenders like Milton Friedman, the father of modern Republican economic ideology. There are also interviews with businessmen who tried to profit off of 9/11 in the Iraq War, as well as industry insiders who develop insidious ways to sell products to you and your children. One of the more fascinating experts is Ray Anderson, the CEO of the world's largest carpet manufacturer, who one day saw the light, realized the harm caused by his company's products and our current corporate model, and set out to create a more sustainable way to do business. Republicans and even the ACLU are championing the Citizens United ruling as a victory for free speech, but I think this misses the most important point, that corporations shouldn't have the right to free speech because they're not people. Non-human legal constructs do not get American human rights, especially if, by their very design, they have the morals and empathy of a killbot. And don't give me the more speech is always good argument, because corporations can't speak because they're not people. And with free speech being defined as money spent on advertising, most actual people hardly have any free speech at all. You know who does? The killbots. Besides, does anyone feel that what's ailing our political system is a lack of corporate influence? But thanks to the Roberts Court, more corporate bot politicians and legislation is exactly what we'll be getting. Which is why you and everyone you know have to see The Corporation, so you can understand what kind of people were just handed an even bigger chunk of our democracy. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a ReThink Review.